In 1836, a man laid under a buffalo robe, coated in dried blood, crawling with lice, and stinking like rotwood. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. And that was winter in the Rockies. Not the postcard, but the nightmare. So think about it. Would you burn bone marrow for heat? Rub deer fat on your face just to keep the skin from splitting? Let ants strip the lice from your shirt while you freeze beside a dying fire? Because that's what it took to make it through, and most didn't. In this episode, we'll break down 7 life-saving hacks mountain men used to survive winters in the Rockies back in the day. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Now let's start with the first lesson. Number 7. Fire mastery. The cold in the Rockies has no patience. It cuts through your coat, your skin, and right into the bone. Out there, fire is what keeps you from dying. You always kept your flint and steel dry. If they got wet, you were screwed. And when you struck them, it had to be clean. You held the flint just right and brought the steel down sharp. The spark had to hit the tinder dead on. If it missed or bounced off, you'd be there in the dark, hands shaking, trying again while the cold chewed at you. Char cloth was your first line. You made it by burning scraps of old linen in a tin until they turned black and crumbly. But sometimes the cloth got wet, snow got in your bag, or rain soaked through your gear. And when that happened, you had to turn to what you could find. Cedar bark worked best. You peeled off the inner bark, thin as you could, dried it near your chest or under your blanket. That stuff could catch a spark even in bad weather. And you know, everything rode in your possibles bag: tinder, steel, flint, knife. Some men lined theirs with beaver fur just to keep things warm and dry. Smart trick. Wet tools don't work. Also, you couldn't build a fire straight on snow. It would melt the base and sink right through. So you laid green logs in a crisscross, cottonwood or pine if you could get it. You stripped the bark off first. The sap underneath burned slower, helped the base hold longer. That gave your fire a fighting chance. And if you had stones nearby, you used them. Flat ones worked best. You laid them under the fire or stacked them behind it. And once they got hot, they gave off heat for hours. Some cracked from the heat, but they held up long enough to matter. People who rushed it paid the price. One mountain man built his fire on bare snow in a hurry. By midnight, he and his partner were crouched in a puddle. Their moccasins froze stiff. The fire was still going, but it couldn't reach them anymore. Some built reflectors, which are stones stacked behind the fire to bounce heat back toward the bedroll. Others made low walls out of logs or brush angled into the wind, pushing warmth into the shelter. The old tribes knew how to do this. Almost everyone learned it from them. But yeah, you had to know how to shape your fire, not just light it. Build it wrong and the heat went the wrong way. Or worse, the whole thing backfired on you. And you know, some men leaned logs behind the flames instead of stacking them upright. That angled the heat down toward their blankets. But if you messed that up, say built your fire too close to a snow shelf overhead, it could kill you. One man did just that. His fire melted the snow above his shelter while he slept, came down on him like a roof caving in. And yeah, people like to talk about smudge fires keeping bugs away. But in winter, they used them different. Some trappers lit smoldering boughs when they were drying meat to hide the smell from wolves. Others, like the natives, burned damp brush on hunts to steer animals without giving off the scent of open flame. But fire wasn't all comfort. A lot of the time, the smoke choked you. You'd sit there with your face burning, eyes watering like a kicked mule. But if you tried to vent it, the heat escaped too. So you sat in it, held your breath when it got bad. No one complained. You just dealt with it. Another man almost died in a snow cave. He said the ice glazed over the walls and the air got heavy. He had to claw his way up to get air, like an animal. You see, that happens when there's no airflow. CO2 creeps in quietly, doesn't take long to knock you out. So, yeah, winter broke men. Not just their bodies, but their nerves too. Their fingers went stiff and black. Men cried while they rubbed life back into their hands, not because they were weak, but because they couldn't take any more. Cold eats at your will. And you know, some trappers kept two fires. One they slept by, just coals under ash. The other was bigger, burning bright through the night. They lit up the trees like a flare, sometimes to guide someone in, sometimes to scare someone off. And you wouldn't build a fire once and call it done. No, you had to keep feeding it. You had to keep watching it. It could burn too fast and leave you cold. And if it burns too low, it'll vanish before dawn. But yeah, forget the movie heroes who stand tall through the storm. The ledgers tell it straight. 1 in 5 trappers out there lost fingers or toes to frostbite. From 1820 to 1840, cold was the real killer. Not the bear, not the blade, the cold. And although fire kept you alive, what you wore decided if you woke up the next morning or didn't. Number 6, clothing. Indeed, winter in the Rockies was hell wrapped in snow. Imagine your buffalo robe so crusted with dried blood and crawling with lice you could barely sleep. That's not a challenge you can easily overcome. Buffalo hides may not have been cozy, but they sure as hell were shields. The long, greasy outer hair shed snow like it hated the stuff, and the thick wool underneath trapped heat like a furnace. A good buffalo robe, with its hair turned inward, could beat a blizzard better than anything woven back east. Problem was, those hides stank like smoked rotwood. They had to, or the moths would eat them alive. As for beaver, same story. Waterproof on the outside, warm underneath. Folks wore them on their heads as caps. But wear anything for 2 months straight and it becomes a vermin motel. Now, deerskin looked nice, moved well in summer, but when snow got to it, it stiffened like iron. Once there was a mountain man who fell through river ice. His soaked buckskins froze solid. His companions had to carve the clothes off with knives. They sliced the poor man's flesh in the process. The natives knew better. They tanned hides with mashed up brain matter. This kept the leather soft even in cold. But most white trappers didn't learn that trick. Too stubborn, too rushed, or they simply didn't ask. Sweat in your clothes during the march, and you'll freeze the moment the sun dips. So, mountain men stripped to their shirts when walking, piled back on once they stopped. Hudson's Bay blankets were gold, not because they looked good, but because they held heat even when wet. And now, let's talk about finding your way when the world turns white. Number 5, winter navigation. The winter of 1836 hit the Rockies like a hammer. Cold settled in your bones and stayed there. Out here, maps didn't come on paper. They came in the shape of rivers, tree lines, and stars. Frozen rivers were mountain men's roads. Madison, Snake, Yellowstone. They'd walk their icy backs like they were trails laid down just for them. When they're frozen solid, you follow them. If you wander off, the cold will find you. Simple as that. It is said that native folks used those iced-up rivers like highways, easier than dragging your boots through deep forest snow. But ice is a liar. One wrong bend, and you're boxed in by cliffs, stuck with nowhere to climb, nowhere to go, just your own tracks fading behind you. You'll only end up walking yourself straight into a canyon shaped like a jail cell and not even know it till you're in too deep. Quick note, if this kind of story grabs you, check out the rest of our channel when you're done. We've got more frontier survival tricks and full episodes digging deep into the lives of the legends you're hearing about. But anyways, out there, when the sky turned white and the world went blind, the only thing you had left was instinct and the stars. Polaris, the North Star, this was a mountain man's anchor. And you know, that kind of skill was learned, sometimes borrowed. The Nez Perce, who'd lived in these mountains longer than any mapmaker, taught trappers to watch the skies. Patterns in the stars meant changes were coming, but it was the Anishinaabe who named Orion the Winter Maker. Whenever it rose in the dusk, winter followed. Out here, trappers borrowed whatever wisdom worked. If a constellation dipped low or changed in season, they paid attention because the stars didn't lie. Not out here. Still, not every man listened, and faith alone won't save you out here. The stars don't promise, they just point. Also, out here, height meant life. You didn't just pick a campsite by where it looked good. No, you picked it by what it gave you. Elevation told you what was coming, and when you camped on ridges, you could see a day's trouble coming. But if you couldn't see far, you couldn't last long. Modern digs back that up. Archaeologists found old trapper shelters in the Green River Valley. Rough stone, bone bits, fire pits angled away from snowdrift lines. Trappers always camped near game trails with wide sight lines. Not for the view. For warning. For dinner. For defense. The natives did the same. One of their elders, Yellow Otter, said they wintered on the breasts of the mountains, where the wind sings loudest, but the enemy's feet crunch louder still. In other words, survival meant hearing the storm before it hit, and being the hunter before he struck. Animals told their own kind of truth. Elk pulling back to the timberline meant snow. Wolves down in the valleys meant you had a break. And when the beaver seals his lodge thick, then you better prepare for hard cold. But you know, that whole idea of the lone mountain man, just a man and his instinct, reading the land like a book? Most of that's movie talk. Beckworth loved to tell stories like that. Said he led a brigade through a snowstorm by catching moonlight off his jackknife. It sounds good in a saloon, but when you follow a false star or a whiskey dream, you'll end up frozen hard as flint, with your face turned east as if pleading for a dawn that never came. And even if you managed to find your way, you still had to quench winter's thirst. Number 4, water sourcing. In the dead of winter, finding water got tricky. Snow's everywhere, yeah, but eat it raw, and you're just digging your own grave. It drops your core temp fast. Eating snow to quench thirst is certain destruction to the Constitution. Instead, you ought to melt it by the fire. The problem was, not everyone had a kettle, and if you didn't, you had to improvise. Heated stones were the go-to. Archaeologists found the signs. Fire-busted rocks and old bison bones in Green River Valley. Back then, that was tech. The natives had it down. Toss hot stones into hide-lined snow pits, let it melt, scoop the water from the bottom. No gear, just know-how. And if you did have a tin cup or a kettle, you guarded it like your life depended on it, because it did. A tin cup is worth its weight in beaver plues, and without it, you might as well suck icicles. Tempting, sure, but every icy gulp bled warmth straight from your core. Do that long enough, and you're gone. Now sometimes snow wasn't even an option. Too dirty, full of ash from your own fire. So you looked for moving water. But rivers were locked under ice. That's where trees came in. Cottonwoods especially. Wherever you saw narrow-leaf cottonwoods, water wasn't far. Maybe just a few feet underground. The problem was, getting to it took time and energy. More than you usually had. And yet, people still get it wrong. Movies show trappers chomping snow like it's nothing. But that'll kill you faster than hunger. Some mountain men's lips would swell shut, black with frostbite, just from eating snow. Now you don't mess with the cold like that. Survival meant slowing down, melting snow, and keeping it from freezing back up. It took time. It took patience. By February, even metals started to quit. Ice jammed up the spouts. Stones lost their heat fast. Some men stuffed snow under their shirts, hoping body warmth would melt it. Then they'd suck the wet out of their sleeves. Snow had layers too. Not all of it was equal. Wind-blasted slopes held what they called depth hoar. It was basically grainy, fragile snow that melted quicker than the dense stuff. Mountain men used to cut those layers into blocks, like rough bricks, and then stack them by the fire. Then they'd let them drip slow into a cup. It wasn't much, but enough to keep going. That was the game. Risk your warmth for water. Spend your strength for a few sips. Every drink was a trade-off, and the Rockies didn't care if you lost. So yeah, water in the Rockies was everywhere, and yet somehow it was still hard to get. But you know, even if you quenched your thirst, the cold wasn't done with you just yet. You still had to survive your own body. Number 3, health and hygiene. Out in the Rockies, your fingers blackened, your lungs filled. You bled into your mittens and tried not to notice. A cough in the morning could turn into a grave by sundown. Out here, hygiene was all about staying alive. Back then, between the 1830s and the 1860s, trappers figured things out the hard way. When they didn't freeze, they got infected. And when they didn't starve, something in their gut would twist wrong. And yet somehow, some of them made it. They learned from the land. They learned from the tribes. They used what they had: animal grease, tree bark, instinct, and pain. The natives showed mountain men how to fix cracked hands with grizzly fat and crushed yarrow. It worked better than anything shipped in from London or Paris. If your skin breaks in that cold, you're bleeding into your snowshoe straps. That's how infection starts. When bear fat ran dry, mountain men switched to deer tallow. Rubbing it on your face before the wind hit would turn the wind's teeth to blunt things. So yeah, you either figured out what worked or you paid for it with skin. And we're not just guessing here. Dig teams found bison bladder pouches at old campgrounds near Green River, stained with the same lipids from bear and deer fat. These were basically medicine kits in an untamed world without doctors. And when fever hit, or a blade slipped and bit into your leg, they turned to willow bark. The Nez Perce and other native tribes boiled red willow bark into tea to ease pain, a practice passed down long before trappers showed up. The bark held salicin, a natural compound similar to what ended up in early aspirin. And while some trappers caught on, others didn't. Even today, tests on old fire pit remains, places trappers once sat, show that bark still packs the same punch. Salicin levels high enough to match the patent meds folks were buying back east. And hey, if you want more brutal frontier survival stories, then don't forget to hit our channel after you're done watching this. It's all there. Hours-long episodes, short episodes. You'll love it. But for now, have you ever heard someone say, rub snow on frostbite? Not only is that bad advice, it's a death sentence. One mountain man back in the day stuck frostbit toes too close to a fire. It thawed them fast. He lost everyone to gangrene. The natives had a better way. You simply had to wrap the limb in fur. It slows the blood back in, lets the body catch up. It wasn't gentle, but it worked. Now, imagine being stuck in a frozen camp for weeks. Same clothes, same stink, same bites. You've got a whole new problem now. Lice? Lice will irritate you. They will drive you mad. One method, passed around from the old camps, involved tossing your shirt onto an anthill. That's right, ants would swarm in and pick off the lice. It was crude, but it worked. Mostly. You got the shirt back full of holes, but at least it wasn't crawling with vermin. And you know, some trappers said black ants did the job best. But as for red ants, they burned like fire and shredded the fabric. You had to choose your misery. However, most of what passed for medicine out there was a mix of indigenous know-how and making do. A mountain man gashed his leg bad once, obsidian flake cut deep. What did he do? He packed it with mashed wild garlic and a spider web. The natives had done it long before. Civil War surgeons would later validate that combo, natural antiseptic and clotting. And if your stomach had gone sideways from bad meat or foul water, then chokecherry root tea was the go-to. Early mountain men picked up fast that the Shoshone knew how to treat gut trouble. One of their go-to fixes was chokecherry root tea. It settled the stomach and stopped the worst of it. You see, when you're out in the cold with no outhouse and no backup, a remedy like that wasn't optional. So yeah, once again, that's what made trapper medicine what it was. Part tradition, part invention, part lies. And under all that, one rule: if it worked, you kept doing it. If it didn't, well, someone else wrote your story. And hey, if you're still alive by now, then guess what? Tomorrow demands a lot more creativity. You've still got a lot of outsmarting to do. Number 2, resourcefulness. Up in the Absarokas, the wind screamed. Cold cut through layers like a knife through rawhide. Every mountain man knew that scream, knew what it meant. And if a storm comes hard one night, you'll have no backup. Just the pack on your back, your hands, and what you'd learned by nearly dying a few times too many. You didn't carry much, 27 pounds, give or take. More than 30, and you moved too slow. And in the mountains, slow could kill you. Survival depended on a knife, fire steel, and knowing how to make one thing do 20 jobs. Water often came in a buffalo bladder, cleaned out, greased with tallow, stitched shut with sinew. That trick came from the locals. Greased right, it wouldn't crack, even in deep freeze. And when gear failed, and it always did, you patched it fast. If your coat tore, you grabbed what you had: a quill, some sinew, maybe a bone needle. You fixed it right there in the cold. Archaeologists still find the proof: beads, quills, broken needles in the ash beds of old camps. Then came the whiteout. Twilight, no stars, just snow tearing sideways across your face. You didn't run, you dug. You made a hole just big enough to lie in, then stacked snow around it tightly. And if you built it wrong, you woke up half frozen, or not at all. Indigenous scouts had been building snow walls longer than any of the fur men, and they built them thick, as long as a horse, according to old stories. The trappers copied the idea, but cut corners too often. But yeah, a real mountain man's kit ought to be lean and mean. A Hawken rifle, 8 traps, 3 flints, a couple of awls, 10 pounds of pemmican, 1 blanket, 1 kettle. That's it. No extras. And that's what we call the survival load. Anything more, and you'd be dragging yourself over passes while war parties or hunger caught up from behind. Now, some of that snow digging we talked about earlier could fall under shelter, sure. But true shelter runs deeper. And since this is the last one on our list, let's get into it. Number 1, shelter. Winter up in the Rockies didn't care who you were, greenhorn or grizzled. You either figured it out or the mountain buried you. Back in the day, nobody was building cozy cabins. Mountain men liked lean-tos small enough to be mistaken for a grave. Pine poles, rawhide, and nothing more. You'd stack juniper boughs on the floor, crush them, and you'd get this sharp, clean scent, almost like camphor. And so, when the storms rolled in hard, sometimes you had no choice but to go under. That's what we call snow caves. Dangerous as they come, but if it's death outside, you dig. The smart mountain man would lay pine boughs on the inside walls to trap a layer of still air. That trick alone could raise the inside temp by a dozen degrees. And if you found a cave or rock overhang in winter, you were lucky. But luck out there always came with a catch. Back in 1805, Lewis and Clark's crew got stranded near what's now Dillon, Montana. They crammed themselves under a limestone ledge. One could imagine how their breath froze right to the rock above their heads, turning the walls against you. Years later, trappers stumbled onto those same kinds of spots. You could still see black streaks on the cave walls, old soot from fires burned long before them. But snow caves, though, nothing like the movies. If you dig wrong, you're digging your own grave. And the funny thing is, indigenous folks had better shelter systems all along. The Nez Perce didn't waste time on bad shelters. When winter hit, they built wickiups. Now these were tight, fast, and warm. Frame made from willow or whatever flexible poles they had on hand. They covered it with dry grass, bark, hides. You could put one up fast, and it worked. Held in heat, blocked the wind, didn't collapse under snow if you built it right. That knowledge came from generations of doing it the hard way. After all, they were semi-nomadic, moving with the seasons. So their shelters had to be portable, easy to rebuild, and tough enough to stand up to the cold. And they were. Meanwhile, as mentioned earlier, most white trappers stuck with lean-tos, bare-bones setups, logs or poles leaned against a crossbeam, maybe covered with pine boughs or a blanket if you were lucky. It was better than nothing, though, but not by much. You see, the wind got in, the heat got out. You could freeze stiff with a fire still burning 10 feet away. And so, in the Rockies, survival came down to one truth. Every spark, every scrap of warmth was a tiny victory against winter's endless hunger. More mountain men died from infected blisters than from bear attack. So why do we still picture them as invincible? Today, we're breaking down what real survival looked like. It shows what the mountain men knew and what we've forgotten. The land hasn't changed. Most people just got soft. Out there, the smallest mistake could kill you. And it still can. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. And now, let's start with what kept mountain men alive when things got rough. Number 7. Firearms. Back in the 1800s, on the frontier, a gun wasn't for show. Mountain men depended on them. If you couldn't shoot straight, reload fast, fix a jam, and clean your weapon, you didn't last. Hunting meant eating. Protection is what stood between you and a grizzly or another man. Out there, there was no law and no one to save you in case you get into any trouble. You handled everything yourself. Back then, the rifle they trusted was the Hawken. Oh boy, what a rifle it was. We've got a special episode on this baby, so be sure to check it out later on. This beauty was built in St. Louis by Jacob and Samuel Hawken, and it was a 50 or 55 caliber muzzle loader. It was big, heavy, and tough. It dropped bison, elk, and bears. Unlike lighter Eastern rifles, the Hawken packed a punch and held up when things got ugly. Black powder guns needed constant care. One shot, then clean it. Skip that, and your next shot might misfire, or worse, blow the barrel. Reloading meant pouring powder, patching a ball, ramming it down, fast with cold fingers and no room for mistakes. Some say not everyone back then carried guns. Maybe. But most knew how to use one. Like starting a fire or dressing a wound, it was just part of life. And yes, accidents happened. No safety courses. Just you and a loaded gun. That part hasn't changed. Guns are still tools. They still feed and protect people. And in some places, they're still the last line between you and real danger. If you spend time deep in the wild, not just at a campground, it's smart to know how to use a firearm. Doesn't matter if it's modern or old, the skill still counts. In survival circles, whether it be off-grid, backwoods, or just being ready, firearms matter. Same reasons: food and protection. Remote living makes it real. Back in the 1800s, mountain men learned quick. Small caliber rifles didn't cut it out west, so they switched to bigger, tougher guns because they worked when it mattered. That still applies today. In a storm, disaster, or deep in the wild, help might not come. A gun can mean survival if you know how to use it. Neglect it, and it becomes a danger, not a tool. The old way demanded care. Ammo was scarce. Every shot was hand-packed and counted. That mindset still matters. Know your weapon. Practice. Don't waste shots. You've also got to know where the round lands and when not to shoot. So yeah, the mental side matters too. And do you know what else matters out there in the wilderness? Warmth? Number 6. The eternal flame. Always has been. For mountain men, it was life or death. They had no lighters like we do now, just flint, steel, and whatever they could find. Frontier legends such as Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith carried kits, flint, steel, maybe charcloth. They'd catch sparks on dry fungus or scorched fabric. If that failed, they used bow drills. Yeah, it's slow, hard work, but freezing in the Rockies leaves no choice. And you know, tinder wasn't random. They hunted for birch bark, cattail fluff, dry pine needles, stuff that lights even when wet. They packed the good stuff, ready to go. Same idea as modern fire kits. Fire gave them warmth, food, clean water, protection. It was also a signal. Smoke meant something when help was miles away. And now, lighters fail, matches get wet. A few years ago, in 2021, a hiker stuck in Montana made fire with quartz and a knife. It saved him. The Federal Emergency Management Agency says fire starting is a top survival skill. Most emergencies need heat or a signal within 2 days, or else. Survival schools still teach it. Tinder bundles from cedar bark, fatwood, birch. Even apps can help, but hands-on work sticks. It's slow and messy, but it works. Today we think about impact, use fire rings, skip live trees. Mountain men didn't have that luxury, but we do. So we carry pits, use downed wood, dig Dakota holes to keep it low, and spare the land. And fire still calms people. Slowing down, focusing, making it happen, it grounds you. A 2020 study backed that up. Fire making lowers stress, gives control, same as it did in a blizzard 200 years ago. Today's tools, however, are better. For instance, ferro rods spark hot, even on bad tinder. Backpackers and soldiers carry them. It's still about knowing how to use what works. But you know, some fires just don't go out. The lighter you move, the longer you last. Number 5. Lightweight. Mountain men packed light? They had to. Every extra pound made things harder. Most carried 30 pounds or less. A rifle, powder, knife, hatchet, some traps, maybe a blanket and fire kit. No extras. Just enough to hunt, eat, stay warm, and keep moving. The wilderness was pretty rough. Thick woods, freezing rivers, killer mountain passes. Slow meant dead. Predators, weather, thieves. Speed was your only edge. Weight killed that edge. Mountain men moved on foot or horseback. Lighter loads meant fewer injuries, less fatigue, and better focus. There was no need for pack animals or extra help. You moved cleaner. John Coulter got it. After Lewis and Clark, he stayed out west, lived with the Crow, learned their ways. He traveled like them, light, fast, and efficient. From fall 1707 to spring 1708, Coulter walked nearly 1,000 miles, alone, in winter, through rough country. He carried just 30 pounds. That'll teach you what matters real quick. The Crow showed him how to live off the land year-round. If you didn't carry it, you made it, or did without. Clothes were also used as tools. Everything had more than one job. And speaking of Coulter, we've got an 8-hour special episode on him, so don't forget to check it out after this one. But yeah, people still get this wrong. They pack for comfort, carry too much. It slows them down, clouds their thinking, and that's how people get hurt. Modern survival still comes back to the same truth. Carry less, no more. Gear helps, but knowledge weighs nothing. If you know how to build shelter, make fire, or use what's around you, you don't need to haul everything. You're not stuck relying on things that break like batteries, fuel, or overbuilt gear. In a crisis, speed matters too. Wildfire, flood, war zone, it's all the same. Mobility saves lives. Heavy packs slow you down. A lighter load means faster choices, more energy, better chances. Ultralight backpackers get it. They trim weight everywhere. Small shelters, simple stoves, multi-use gear, just enough food. It's simple math, really. Less weight equals more distance. Survival schools and military drills do the same. Almost no gear, just essentials. It's all about finding what really works. You adapt, improvise. Then you keep moving, and your mind clears. You stop worrying about gear. You lean on skill, not stuff. That clarity can save your life. And now that you're moving light, let's look closer. It's time to read the land. Number 4. Tracking and wildlife knowledge. Alone in the wilderness, like Jim Bridger or Jedediah Smith, you either read the land or died. You had no GPS or any other device, just miles of tough ground, predators, and hunger. Tracking told you where food was, where danger hid, how fresh a trail was. Ground, brush, air. If you knew how to read them, they spoke. Mountain men studied tracks. Elk left big, blocky prints, 4 inches, toes splayed in soft soil. Mule deer were smaller, heart-shaped, with a pointier front. Moose prints were huge, blunt, 5 to 7 inches long. Nothing else looked like that. As for predators, wolves and coyotes showed claw marks. Cougars and lynx didn't. Their prints looked smooth, oval. Bears were easy. They had wide paws, long curved claws, back feet like giant human prints. But it wasn't only shapes. Movement mattered too. Walking deer, 2-foot gaps. Running, 6 to 8. Grazing, close together. Mud showed detail. Snow distorted detail. One print wasn't enough. You watched for patterns, and sometimes tracks didn't tell the full story. So you looked up. Broken branches said who fed there and how tall. Deer browsed at 3 to 4 feet. Moose higher. Bears snapped branches reaching fruit. Green breaks meant it just happened. Then there were rubs. Bucks scraped antlers on trees. Hair stuck in bark helped ID the animal. Reddish for mule deer, black-tipped for bear. Scat helped too. Herbivores dropped dry pellets. Predators left twisted piles with fur, even bone. Then you step back to see the whole picture. Game trails and hard to spot unless you knew. For example, narrow, faint paths with pressed grass, bent stems, patches of mud, these led to water or ridges. And water crossings were key. Hooves cut into banks. Beavers left smooth slides from dragging logs. And when you're tracking, don't just follow footprints. Use 3 checks. First, anchor yourself. Pick a landmark so you don't drift. Second, trace the path, not every mark. Third, confirm. Look nearby for signs. A snapped branch, scat, another print near a rub. That's how you know it's fresh. And always check the wind. It doesn't make noise, but it decides everything. And you can't see it, but animals can smell you if it's blowing wrong. That's how you lose them or run into trouble. Old-timers stayed downwind. They read wind with grass, leaves, or smoke. Once you know the direction, don't walk straight in. Zigzag. Flank the trail. Let your scent flow away. To aid with that, mask your smell. Rub pine, smear mud, stay out of the breeze. Don't bring strong smells. Even a bite of smoked meat can blow your cover. Wind changes with terrain. In valleys, for instance, air rises in the morning and drops at night. Early on, your scent rides up. By mid-morning, thermals lifted higher. That helps if you're behind and moving uphill. But if the wind changes, stop. Don't push it. Back out or change course. Once they smell you, you're done. Mountain men weren't lucky. They paid attention. They watched the land. Every sign, every wind shift, it meant something. They moved with it, not against it. That awareness comes from slowing down. If your phone's dead, your map's soaked, and the trail's gone, this is what's left. A print, a breeze, a narrow game trail to water. You spot cougar tracks, 3 inches, clean, no claws. You don't keep walking. You stop, you listen. You've got to read the land without a screen. That's pure survival. Less guessing, more seeing. We've got GPS, maps, trail cams now, but what if the signal dies? What if batteries fail? Tracking doesn't. It runs on awareness, not power. Hunters still use it for clean, quick kills. Biologists follow signs to study wolves, cougars, endangered species, especially in places like Yellowstone. Wildlife photographers rely on it too, not drones, just quiet, patience, and knowing where to be. Search and rescue? Same thing. A print, bent grass, snapped twig. Sometimes that's what finds someone. It's what mountain men used. Still works. Also, tracking teaches you what technology can't. Self-reliance. GPS won't see high ant mounds before rain or a fading wolf track. But you might if you're watching. The more you learn, the more you see. How migration moves. How forests fall silent. That awareness makes you part of the land, not just a visitor. Some schools still teach it. Boulder Outdoor Survival School trains long-form tracking, and they've been around in Utah since 1968. Even more, apps like iTrack Wildlife help log signs. New tech, old skill. But in the end, it's you, the ground, and what your senses catch. That's the skill. That's the edge. Now, reading the wild is hard, but surviving your own mind? Much harder. Number 3. Mental resilience. Now, aside from battling cold and hunger and whatever else the wilderness tried to throw at you, mountain men also had to fight their minds. We're talking about long silence. The wild didn't care how tough you looked, only if you could hang on when things went bad. Mental resilience was real survival. When storms hit, food ran low, and something followed you at night. And if your mind broke, your body went next. Guys like Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith wandered alone for weeks. No voices, just wind. Maybe wolves? That kind of quiet messes with you. Time warps, purpose fades, focus slips. And you know, we have studies on it now. But these frontier legends didn't. They just lived it. They didn't fight the loneliness. They accepted it. They didn't waste energy feeling better. They simply had to stay dry, fed, alert. Now that shift from comfort to necessity, that was the edge. Still is. Resilience keeps you thinking when fear hits. You've got to move through fear, step by step. And it's built, not born. Built through stress. Science backs it. Resilience is habits. Self-talk, framing setbacks. Whether you move or freeze, mindfulness, physical training, staying grounded, it all helps. But at the core, it's this. Train your mind to bend, not snap. Mountain men learned this fast. No therapy, no tools. They let fear in, but didn't let it lead. They also expected danger. It wasn't rare, it was constant. Broken bones, frostbite, infection, bites. No hospitals, no meds. Panic killed. So they didn't panic. They treated pain like a signal, not a crisis. Pain meant act, not collapse. Fear's allowed, just don't hand it the wheel. Also, mountain men had to make fast, clear calls. Camp here or move, cross now or wait. Friend or threat, one mistake could kill you. That kind of clarity came from a trained mind, not just experience. They blocked out noise, read the moment, and acted fast. Same rule now. In combat, crisis, or wilderness, freeze and you're done. Then came the hunger, the exhaustion. Days with almost no food. Fatigue scrambles your brain, makes you reckless. But they didn't fold. They broke the day into small tasks. Stay warm, find water, make fire. That micro-focus kept them sharp, still used today in survival and therapy. And they faced real loss. Friends and companions gone. Trust broken. Last supplies wiped out overnight. But they learned to set pain aside, just enough to keep going. That kind of emotional discipline is critical. Modern-day combat medics and disaster teams do the same. You can't fall apart mid-crisis. That happens later. In the end, mountain men knew, once the mind breaks, nothing else matters. And now, the next threat to your survival is not in your head. It's far above it. Number 2, weather prediction. As you all know, mountain men didn't have forecasts. No radar, no alerts. The only thing they had was instincts. They read the sky because missing the signs could kill them. Cold rain meant hypothermia. Flash floods could erase a camp. So they watched clouds, wind, animals, every clue. Cirrus clouds, which are thin and high, meant something was coming soon. Cumulonimbus clouds, those tall, dark anvils, these meant move now. Mountain men built fast when warm air hit cold. If you saw one rise over a ridge, you didn't wait. You dropped low, found cover. And in the Rockies, storms came quick, 10 minutes, maybe less. Out in the desert when monsoons roll in, that flat-topped, dark-bottomed cloud means go. Don't stare. Don't guess. Move. People still die waiting too long. Other clouds gave softer warnings. Mackerel skies, altocumulus scattered like fish scales, meant steady rain or snow within a day or so. Not dangerous at first, but enough to soak gear, turn trails to mud, kill fires. And when they saw that sky, they prepped camp and stayed put. In places like the Pacific Northwest, it still means storm. They had other signs too. That old line, red sky at night, sailor's delight, red in morning, sailor take warning. A red sunrise meant low pressure rolling in. More wind, more moisture, worse weather. In the backcountry, if the sky burns red before breakfast, you don't rush a summit. Mountain men read the wind too. West wind, usually calm, but an east wind meant dropping pressure. You could feel it in your ears, your joints, even your skin. Your hair would stand up. All it took was time and attention. Mountain men didn't need a weather app. You still don't if you're watching close. Same signs, same sky, different boots. Also, mountain men watched animals too. Birds, bugs, livestock. They all react before a storm. You just need to know the signs. Swallows were a big one. Insects fly low when pressure drops, so swallows follow. If you saw them skimming low, rain was coming. It's in journals from the 1800s, and paddlers in Minnesota still use it. When the birds disappear, people paddle to shore. Geese were another clue. If they migrated early, winter would hit hard. Science now ties it to hormones, but the old-timers didn't need the why. They saw the signs and got ready. Ranchers still do. Ants gave signals too. Steep-sided mounds meant heavy rain. They were waterproofing. Farmers still check for that. If ants are busy, they prep their fields. As for bees, if they swarm back to the hive fast, a storm's close. Appalachian beekeepers seal hives when they see it. Mammals were the loudest warnings. Deer pulling into thick woods, elk dropping to valleys. That's shelter, not chance. See it, follow suit. Even more, when squirrels bury food like crazy, that meant a rough stretch. Jim Bridger watched for it. So did Colorado runners in 2022. They turned back, a snowstorm hit hours later. Even livestock know. Goats get jumpy, cows lie down, ranchers trust it. From Wyoming to Argentina. This still matters. Hikers in 2023 followed deer uphill. Flash floods came later. The old journals were right. But why should you care? Well, because hypothermia can kill quick. A cold snap can drop your temp fast. And as for flash floods, 1 minute it's dry, the next it's a river. Reading the signs saves energy too. If bad weather's coming, you stop pushing forward. You dig in. Wait it out. Nowadays, smart folks use both tech and instinct. Apps help, weather can and such, but animals tell you what's coming. Even pine cones do. If they close, it means moisture's in the air. So, yeah, technology's great, but if it fails, or you've got no signal, it's the old ways that'll keep you alive. And after the flood, the fall, the fever, what then? Now it's time to treat the aftermath. Number 1, wilderness medicine. Out there in the wilderness, you either handled injuries yourself or you died. You only had your own hands to help you and what you could find. That's why mountain men had to know how to treat wounds, sickness, and pain using the land. They had no other choice. Even a small cut could turn deadly. Infection led to fever. Fever led to risk. And you didn't have antibiotics or do-overs. So, mountain men back then used what they knew: plants, folk cures, and so on. Many learned from native tribes. This was real medicine, not superstition. And speaking of that, we've got a special episode on the different types of ancient healing techniques used by native medicine men, some of which still apply today. So, be sure to check it out on our channel when it goes live. But yeah, back then, yarrow was key. If you got cut, then you better pack it in. It stops bleeding and fights infection. You chew it, mash it, slap it on. It grew everywhere. And for pain and fever, mountain men used willow bark. You simply boil it into tea, then drink it down. Yeah, it tasted bitter, but it worked. It's got salicin. That's nature's aspirin for you. Also, plantain helped with bites, stings, and rashes. It also fights swelling and blocks infection. You simply crush it and press it on. As for echinacea, it's big for chest stuff, sore throats, and even snake bite. Furthermore, golden seal handled gut bugs and infections. But you know they didn't stop at plants. If a wound kept bleeding, they'd burn it shut with a hot blade. Melted pine resin made a sticky salve. And alcohol was poured straight in. Yeah, it hurt bad, but it worked better. Moreover, branches became splints. Torn shirts turned into slings. And if you couldn't walk, you were done. Like we said earlier, moving meant living. After all, not everyone gets hurt near a hospital. So, if you go hiking or camping and a storm hits and your phone dies, no help's coming. What you know might be all you've got. Modern wilderness first aid still teaches this. Clean wounds with what's around. Wrap sprains, treat burns, catch hypothermia early. Know which plants help, which don't. Same idea, basically. Act fast, use what's there, stop it from getting worse. Like we always say, the wilderness doesn't care if you live. It never did. The mountain men knew this. They forged survival from frostbite, hunger, and silence. Today, we've traded flint for Wi-Fi, instinct for algorithms. But the old threats remain. Cold still freezes, storms still drown. So ask yourself, when the screens die and the walls crack, what's left? Not your gear, certainly not your luck. You'll never outsmart the land. The mountain men learned that. The cold is a living thing. It bites deep. It settles in your bones. It numbs your hands and fingers. Your breath hangs in the air. The wind wails like a starving wolf, ripping heat straight from your skin. Your fire is dying, your food is gone, and the snow keeps falling. Most men wouldn't last a night, but somehow, some did. This is what the frontiersmen faced. If they fail to survive the winter, they'll end up as bones buried under the snow. But how did they outlast severe blizzards, starvation, and death itself? How did they find warmth when everything was ice? And how did they fight a winter that wants them dead? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Stay till the end for a first-hand account, a mountain man's own words on his fight against impossible odds. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Now, before fire, before food, before shelter, the fight against winter started with something much simpler. Number 1, layer up or freeze. Frontiersmen knew the trick to staying warm. build heat from the inside out. They'd start with a long-tailed shirt, sometimes two. Then they'd pull on a thick leather overshirt. Afterward, they'd top it with a heavy wool or buckskin coat. Each layer held heat, blocked wind, and kept them moving. And a bare head meant lost warmth. A wool cap, felt hat, or fur-lined skin cap trapped it in. And when the wind cut deep, they wrapped a neckerchief high, covering ears and mouth. Hands stayed buried in thick leather mittens, fingers together, warmer that way. The core had to stay hot, or nothing else mattered. That's where the belly band came in, long wool sashes wound tight around the waist, locking in heat where it counted. And at night, they slept fully dressed, boots off but hats on, wrapped in furs and wool blankets, huddled near the fire. The feet had to stay warm, or else a man was done. Thick leather boots, packed with fur, kept the cold out. Wool wrappings sealed off the lower legs, blocking snow, locking in heat. And if boots failed, frontiersmen turned to moccasins. These were made of soft deer skin with the fur inward, good enough for trapping warmth. Moccasins were lighter, quieter, and better for tracking in deep snow. Even the fringe had a purpose. It wicked away moisture before it could freeze and stiffen the leather. And if something tore, they'd cut a strip, tie it off, and keep moving. However, making moccasins took time. The hide had to be softened first. Brain tanning did the trick, working the animal's own oils deep into the fibers. The result? Tough, flexible leather that lasted, bent with the foot, and held off the cold. And in dry weather, they were a lifesaver. But in the wet, a total disaster. Deerskin sucked up moisture fast, turning hard and useless. So, when the weather turned, men either stuck close to a fire or swapped them out for heavier boots. Now, history doesn't say much about fur-side in moccasins, but the logic is there. Some believe frontiersmen borrowed the idea from Native Americans, just like they did so many other survival tricks. Sheepskin boots worked the same way. Fur inside, trapping warmth, used in icy regions across the world. At the end of the day, frontiersmen weren't exactly chasing style. They had to wear what kept them alive. Staying warm in daylight was one thing, but surviving the night? That was another fight entirely. That was when the real test began. Number 2, sleeping through the cold. Frontiersmen didn't build cozy log cabins. It was too much work, and there was too little time. They focused more on a lean-to maybe, boughs and limbs stacked tight, covered with skins, blankets, or canvas. Now, since we've covered how they slept fully clothed, it's important to note that frontiersmen didn't usually have sleeping bags. Few owned them at all. If he was lucky, he'd have a canvas or skin stretched overhead, open to the fire, trapping just enough heat to hold off the worst of the cold. Wool blankets were the bed of choice. They were warm, durable, and easy to carry. Buffalo robes worked too. They were heavier but better at blocking the wind. A candle, if he had one, blinked inside a lantern, though firelight was usually enough. Light also meant safety. Darkness was risk. Now, some frontiersmen found a better way. Instead of makeshift shelters, they wintered in buffalo skin lodges, built like native teepees. These were thick, tanned hides unfolded over a frame of strong poles about 10 feet across. It gave enough room for 6, maybe 7 men. Inside, reeds covered the ground, blankets and robes piled on top. Baggage lined the outer walls, blocking drafts. A fire burned in the center, the smoke escaping through flaps at the peak. Flaps they could adjust to let in light, bright enough to read by. As for their choice of firewood, aspen wood fires burned clean, no thick smoke to choke on. That meant no need for candles, no need to waste supplies. And when it came to surviving the night, Simplicity was key. The bedroll, which was a wool blanket wrapped tight in a water-resistant canvas, was the frontiersman's best friend. It kept him dry, blocked the wind, and held heat even when damp. He'd lay it out on frozen ground, canvas down, wool up. If rain or snow rolled in, he'd fold the canvas over himself, cocooning against the storm. Aside from sleeping purposes, the bedroll doubled as storage. Clothes, tools, rations, whatever he needed was all tucked inside, rolled up tight, strapped with leather or rope. He'd sling it over his shoulder, tie it to his saddle, and move on. Cowboys swore by it. Soldiers did too, rolling their shelter halves the same way during the Civil War, keeping mobile, staying ready. And so, night after night, frontiersmen fought against the cold. After all, hypothermia was always waiting, ready to take the careless. Also, if you want to know how frontiersmen survived the wild, what they ate, the tools they used, and the tricks that kept them alive, check out other episodes. We've got plenty more frontier survival stories waiting. Meanwhile, out there in the wilderness, during winters, the night was always long and the cold cruel. But there was one thing that could turn the odds in a frontiersman's favor. Number 3, fire or death. A frontiersman without fire? Now, that's a dead man walking. Every mountain man carried the essentials: his rifle, a knife, a powder horn, lead balls, and a flint and steel fire kit. Some had extras: an extra knife, a tomahawk, maybe even a flintlock pistol. And if he was lucky, he had a pack horse loaded with supplies. If he lost his gun, his knife, or his horse, then he was in serious, serious trouble. When deep winter set in, fire meant life. Fire cooked meals, dried clothes, warded off predators, and most importantly, kept a man from freezing solid. Though we mentioned how a quick lean-to or a buffalo robe might shield him from the wind, without fire, none of it mattered. Flint and steel were essential. Steel striker in one hand, flint rock in the other. A sharp strike sent sparks flying. The trick was catching one on char cloth, a scrap of burned cotton that glowed like a coal. That ember got tucked into dry tinder, fungus, shredded bark, or fine fibers. A few careful breaths, and a flame was born. No matches, no second chances. This, however, took practice. The first time a greenhorn tried, he'd fumble, curse, maybe waste a whole night shivering. But for a seasoned mountain man, it was second nature. He could spark a fire in a blizzard in the dead of night with fingers half frozen. In trapping camps, wall tents gave more shelter but were harder to heat. No chimney, no vent. Fire inside meant suffocation. Fire outside meant fighting the cold. There was no perfect answer, just experience, grit, and a will to survive. But yeah, fire did 3 things. It was a weapon against the wilderness, a signal to the lost, and a defiant answer to winter's bite. Without it, a man wouldn't last long. Now, keeping warm was just step 1. Staying alive took a whole lot more. Number 4, chores. During winter in the wilderness, stillness meant death. Frontiersmen had to keep moving, working, doing, because stopping wasn't an option. Every day, they hunted and trapped. That meant miles of trudging through snow, dragging heavy pelts, setting traps in ice-choked streams, and gutting game with half-frozen hands. Osborne Russell wrote of these tough tasks and of the constant effort it took to stay fed and keep furs coming in. Then there was wood. You chopped it or you froze. Axes swung from dawn to dusk, splitting logs, felling trees, feeding the fire that kept the cold at bay. Shelters needed repairs too. Roofs patched, walls reinforced, anything to hold back the winter's attack. Even in the dead of winter, travel didn't stop. Men crossed rivers crusted with ice, pushed through knee-deep snow, and fought through storms just to trade or scout new ground. John Franklin's copper-mine expedition had men marching 40 miles in a day, starving, freezing, desperate to survive. But yes, as you can imagine, at camp, chores never ended. Someone skinned beaver, stretched hides, cooked, repaired gear. The youngest did the grunt work, while old hands kept watch for raiders. Warren A. Ferris wrote that camp keepers cooked, guarded the horses, and stood ready to defend the camp at a moment's notice. Sometimes they were hired for the job. Other times, seasoned trappers forced the greenhorns into it. Joe Meek, who lived through the Rockies, remembered waking with ice crusted on the lodge roof. The trappers stayed in their blankets, calling for the camp keepers to light the fire. Soon enough, the lodge was warm, and another hard day began. Trappers had their own work cut out for them. If the rivers weren't frozen solid, they ran their trap lines, sometimes using tricks to pull beaver from the ice. Joe Meek described it, tapping the frozen surface, listening for a hollow sound, then sealing off the hole. From there, they tracked the beaver's underwater tunnels, waiting for it to surface and snaring it mid-journey. But most winter trapping happened in warmer regions or during brief thaws. And by the way, we've got a special 5-hour episode on Joe Meek's wild survival story in the Rockies on our channel, so be sure to check it out. And speaking of survival, nothing mattered more than meat. Meat was everything. No flour, no vegetables, just fresh killed game, piled high. Nothing is actually necessary for survival in the wilderness but meat, William H. Ashley wrote in 1825. Buffalo was the top choice, but they ate elk, deer, antelope, bighorn sheep, and even bear when needed. They gorged when they could, burning it off in the cold. Winters in the Rockies didn't mean scarcity because game was everywhere. Trappers' journals tell of hunts where they brought down hundreds of animals in a season. For instance, in early winter 1832, Andrew Drips's fur company camped at the Snake River Forks, where men left at dawn and returned with fresh meat before breakfast. Warren A. Ferris wrote of the sheer abundance hunters loaded up with whatever they could carry. And Joe Meek called Powder River Valley a hunter's paradise in 1829. That winter, the land swarmed with game, and the trappers lived like kings, eating well, staying strong, and making the most of the wilderness before the thaw. But even the toughest mountain men had limits, and when the cold got worse, they turned to those who knew it best. Number 5. Wintering with the natives. When the snow hit hard, smart trappers knew where to turn: native camps. Taking shelter was a key advantage, but frontiersmen survived by following the ways of the locals for generations. Tribes like the Crows, Shoshones, and Nez Perces knew the best wintering spots, where the wind cut less, where the game still moved. Some trappers even married into tribes, sealing alliances that meant food, protection, and trade. Marrying a chief's daughter wasn't all romance, it locked in ties with the whole tribe. Likewise, for native women, a trapper decked out in St. Louis finery was a status symbol, a provider who treated her better than many warriors would. Some marriages lasted a season, some a lifetime. Either way, they meant survival. Life in a native camp came with its own challenges, nonetheless. James Kleiman, a seasoned trapper, spent a severe winter with the Crows in 1823. He watched in shock as they cut through the ice every morning to bathe, even as frost hung in the air. To them, the cold wasn't exactly an enemy. It was part of life. And for newcomers, communication was everything. Some relied on interpreters like Edward Rose, a black frontiersman who lived with the Crows in 1824. His knowledge of their language and customs made him invaluable, turning him into a figure of power among the trappers. Another black interpreter, found in a Crow village near the Shoshone River, claimed to have traveled with Lewis and Clark. The tribe treated him like royalty. He wanted for nothing. But most trappers didn't have an interpreter at their side. If they wanted to trade, eat, or stay alive, they had to learn the language fast. And beyond hunkering down, winter camps also served as spaces for learning. Trappers swapped stories, shared tricks, and most importantly, got intel from the tribes. In February 1824, deep in the Wind River Valley, the Crows told Jedediah Smith's men about a shortcut north, a pass leading to beaver-rich waters. Smith was so eager he ignored the season and charged into the mountains. It was a disaster. Snow swallowed the party, forcing them back. Back in camp, however, James Kleiman had a better idea. He spread a buffalo robe on the ground, piled sand on top, and let the Crows draw him a map. They built mountains with their hands, showing him a safer route, South Pass at the southern end of the Wind River Range. By March, Smith and a handful of men made the crossing, reaching the Green River and pushing farther west than any Americans since the Astorians. But not all encounters with the tribes were friendly. Raiding parties were a constant threat, and venturing from camp could mean death. Still, trappers didn't sit idle. Some went out for meat, some for adventure, others just to break the monotony. One wrong step could cost you. In the winter of 1823, Daniel T. Potts lost his way in the mountains and froze his feet solid. He couldn't walk, couldn't hunt, he was as good as dead. But a native village found him, carried him to their chief's lodge, and saved his life. Twice a day, the chief stripped down to his breechcloth, tended to Potts's wounds, and nursed him back to health. Yet how many other frontiersmen owed their lives to a well-timed act of kindness? No one knows. Want more real survival stories? A mountain man lasting 9 years in the Rockies, a young fur trader braving negative 40 degrees in the Canadian wilds, a lone trapper battling Missouri's deadliest winter. These stories actually happened. Find them only on our channel. Anyhow, a man could have the best shelter in the world, but out there, in the cold wilderness, warmth came in more ways than one. Number 6. Communal comfort. In the dead of winter, when the wind cut like a knife and the cold bled into bone, at night, mountain men huddled. A fire at the center, men coiled in a tight semicircle around it, enveloped in furs, boots still on, rifles within reach. Heat meant life, and they made sure no one froze. If the fire flickered too low, someone was always awake to feed it, tossing on wood, stirring the coals, keeping the dark at bay. But warmth wasn't the only reason they slept close. You see, a sleeping man was a dead man if he wasn't ready. Predators awaited, both beast and man. Outlaws, Blackfeet raiders, hungry wolves, none of them scared off easy. Close quarters meant quick defense. A twig snapped in the night? Knives were drawn before the sound had time to settle. And when the killing cold eased up, then came the stories. Men passed whiskey and laughter like currency, swapping tales of blood, survival, and luck. Osborne Russell remembered nights when laughter rolled through camp like thunder, only fading when one by one the men dropped off to sleep. And Christmas out in the wild wasn't just another day. If food was plentiful, they feasted. Stewed elk, buffalo hump, dried meat, whatever they had. And if they had whiskey or rum, they drank. They shot at targets, wrestled, raced horses. The fire burned high, and for a few hours, life felt easy. But winter wasn't always kind. Some nights, the wind shrieked, and the fire barely held on. And some mornings, men didn't wake up at all. Still, those who survived remembered the good times. Washington Irving wrote that in winter, the mountain men lived fat and free. Joe Meek called it a season of plenty, of rest, of good humor. But in the end, winter was never just a time to relax. It was a test. It was always a test, and only the toughest men lived to see the thaw. Indeed, shelter, fire, companionship, all of them were critical, but none of it mattered without fuel. Number 7. A fatty diet. Food meant survival, and fat was king. As mentioned earlier, frontiersmen lived on meat such as buffalo, elk, deer, bear, or whatever they could kill. The more fat, the better. It kept them warm, kept them moving. Rufus Sage, a seasoned trapper, wrote about it. How men gorged on meat when they had it, knowing lean times were always around the corner. Starvation was a season. During some winters, men were driven to eat their moccasins, their dogs, anything. And when meat was scarce, they waited, hoping to find a half-frozen carcass before hunger took them down. Buffalo was the prize. Trappers swore by its fatty cuts, claiming it was richer, better than beef. And when herds were near, they feasted, stuffing themselves, storing fat on their bodies like a second coat. But when herds moved on, they fell back on pemmican, a mix of dried meat, melted fat, and sometimes berries. Pemmican was frontier gold. It was lightweight, long-lasting, and packed with energy. Trappers, explorers, even polar expeditions relied on it. Robert Peary, the Arctic explorer, called it essential. Without it, his men would have frozen. And in 1814, pemmican even started a war. Governor Miles MacDonell tried to cut off the Métis trade with his pemmican proclamation. The Métis fought back. No pemmican, no survival. It was that simple. And although meat was life, when it ran out, frontiersmen ate whatever they could find. Roots, berries, ants, even boiled animal hides. Hunger didn't care about pride. You ate or you died. Truly, fat was survival in another form. When the cold bit deep, men smeared animal fat on their skin to block the wind and hold in body heat. Tallow, rendered from beef or mutton, was easy to make. Frontiersmen would heat it slow and then skim off the junk. Then, what's left was a thick, stable grease. They slathered it on their faces, hands, anywhere exposed. It sealed in warmth and kept frostbite away. They greased their boots and leather gear too. Fat made things last, kept water out, kept cold from creeping in. They weren't the first to do it, however. Indigenous people across the world knew the trick. In Western Australia, for example, they mixed fat with red ochre, creating a protective paste against sun and insects. And so, on the frontier, every trick mattered. But hold on, we're not done yet. There's one more story. We've seen how the mountain men survived, but now let's step into the shoes of one who almost didn't. Bonus content: James Clyman's Fight for Life. James Clyman rode with legends Bridger, Fitzpatrick, Smith, but unlike most, he wrote things down. His journals give us an authentic look at frontier life. On one brutal winter in the Wind River Valley, he and William Sublette left camp to hunt. Meat was running low. Then the blizzard hit. Snow pounded down. Wind screamed through the valley. There was no shelter, no firewood, just buffalo robes, rifles, and grit. And as you all know, survival was always a test. One, many failed. And now, to close this episode, here's Clyman's own account of staring death in the face. In traveling up the Popo Agi, a tributary of Wind River, we came to an oil spring near the main stream whose surface was completely covered over with oil resembling British oil. And not far from the same place were stacks of petroleum of considerable bulk. Buffalo being scarce, our supply of food was quite scanty. Mr. Sublette and myself mounted our horses one morning and put in quest of game. We rode on until near sundown when we came in sight of 3 male buffalo in a very open and exposed place. Our horses being too poor to run, we made an effort to approach them, by crawling over the ice and snow, but our game saw us and was about to break when we arose and fired. Luckily, we broke one's shoulder. Had we had our horses at hand so as to mount and follow, we would soon have had meat, but our horses were nearly a mile distant. So Sublet went back for our horses, and I loaded my rifle and followed the wounded buffalo. There being an uneven ridge about a mile distant in the direction the game went, my hope was to head him there and get another shot. I ran with all my speed, and fortunately, when I came out of cover, was in easy gunshot. When, all breathless, merely pointing in the direction of the game, to my surprise, I gave him a dead shot. Before I could reload, he fell dead in a steep gutter where I could not commence butchering until Sublet came up to assist me. Night came on before we got our meat butchered. Shortly after the sun left us, the north wind arose and grew stronger and stronger, and a cold, frosty snow commenced falling before we finished our suppers. There being no wood, and sage being small and scarce, and scattering what little fire we had in all directions, we spread down our scanty bed, and covered ourselves as close as possible from the wind and snow which found its way through every crevice. Although the wind blew and the fine frosty snow crept in and around us, this was not the worst, for the cold, hard, frozen earth on which we lay was still more disagreeable, so that sleep was out of the question by turning every method for rest. Daylight at last appeared when we consulted what we had best do under the circumstances, and it was agreed that I should arise and gather some sagebrush, which was small and scarce, and would remain under the buffalo robe and keep his hands warm if possible to strike fire. But all our calculations failed, for as soon as our hands became exposed to the air, they became so numb that we could not hold the flint and steel. We then resorted to our guns with no better success, for the wind was so strong and for the want of some fine material to catch the fire in. My comrade wrapped himself in his robe and laid down. After a great struggle, I made out to saddle my horse and was about to leave the inhospitable spot. Not wishing to leave my friend, I asked him if he could ride if I saddled his horse, but he thought not and was unwilling to try. I then made several unsuccessful efforts to obtain fire. Just as I was about to mount and leave, I ran my hand in the ashes to see if any warmth remained. To my joy, I found a small coal of fire alive, not larger than a grain of corn. Throwing it into a handful of material I had gathered, it started ablaze in a minute, and in 1 minute more, I had a fine fire. My friend got out and crawled up to my side. Drawing our robes around our backs, we tried to warm ourselves, but the wind being so strong, the smoke and fire came into our faces by the back current. I saddled the other horse, packed up the meat, while Sublet gathered sagebrush to keep up a fire, which was no little job, for it was carried away almost as fast as he put it on. At length we mounted and left. I put my friend ahead and followed, urging his horse along. We had about 4 miles to timber. I found I would be liable to freeze on horseback, so I got off and walked. It being a north inclination, the snow was about 1 foot deep. I saw my friend was too numb to walk, so I took the lead for the last half mile and struck a grove of timber where there was an old Indian hut, one side of which was still standing. I got fire almost immediately, then ran back and whooped up my friend's horse, assisted him to dismount and get to the fire. He seemed to have no life to move as usual. He laid down nearly asleep while I went broiling meat on a stick. After a while, I roused him up and gave him his breakfast. When he came to, he was as active as usual. He kneads gunpowder into a rag until it's half liquid. He plants a percussion cap on his spur. He strikes it with his bowie knife. The rag erupts in flame in his own hand. And now, how about you? What would you burn to stay alive? And how far would you go when the cold hunts you? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on 7 frontier fire hacks born of desperation. We'll show you how raw materials, from black powder to burning glass, became the last line between warmth and death. My name is Sam. And this is Wild America. And now, let's start at the very beginning with nothing but 2 sticks. Number 1. Hand drill, wood-on-wood friction fire. Fire wasn't always struck from steel. You see, sometimes when the flint was lost or the tinder was soaked, a man had to go back further, way back, to wood on wood, to friction, to the old way, the hand drill. It's as simple as dirt, but hard as hell. The natives knew it long before the first trapper stumbled into these mountains. They'd spin a stick between their palms, grind it down into a notch on a flat piece of wood, and work until the dust glowed into a coal. Blow it right, and you've got flame. Lewis and Clark saw it done in the summer of 1805 up in Shoshone country. One of their men watched a tribesman work the drill. They called it curious. Maybe it was. These were men used to flint and steel, quick sparks, fast fire. But out here, things got lost. Tools broke. And sometimes a man had to remember what he'd seen, what he'd been shown in some quiet moment by hands that knew the land better than he ever would. But yeah, like I said, it wasn't easy. The right wood helped: yucca, cedar, willow for the spindle, something soft for the fireboard, cottonwood, sage, dry as bone. A practiced man could do it in half a minute. But a greenhorn? He might rub himself raw before he ever saw smoke. You had to keep working the spindle hard. Your palms will burn and your arms ache badly. The wood would blacken first. Then it would get powdered. Dark dust would then gather in the notch, and the heat would build up with every spin. You'd have to keep at it. You can't slow down. The second you eased up, the ember died before it was born. But once you keep at it, you'll eventually catch a smoke. A tiny hint of it, swirling up from below, but it's a tiny, tiny glow, faint as the first light of dawn. And that was your coal. Then you'd tip it gently into a nest of dry grass, shredded bark, or whatever would catch. Then you'd cup it in your hands like a dying man holding his very last match. Then you'd breath life into it, slowly, progressively. Breath too hard, and you'd smother it. Breath too soft, and it'd fade. The natives made it look easy. Out in the dry southwest, where the yucca stalks were bone-white and ready, a man could spin fire fast. But up in the cold, damp mountains, that's a whole different story. You see, wet wood wouldn't bite. Tired hands couldn't keep the pace. A trapper with busted knuckles or a fever might as well be rubbing stones together for all the good it'd do him. But most frontiersmen stuck to flint and steel when they could. It was faster and cleaner. But if you've ever tried spinning a stick between your palms till your hands bleed, you know there's got to be a better method. Number 2, bow drill. Fire from friction, that's another old way, similar to the previous one we talked about. Enter the bow drill. Same principle. Wood grinding on wood. But this time, you've got a little help. A bow strung tight, looping once around a spindle. The way it works is by sawing it back and forth. And that spindle whirls fast, biting into the fireboard beneath. No more blistered palms. Folks had been using this trick long before the mountain men came along. The Inuit up north, where the wind steals heat like a thief, they fashioned their sockets from bone, and then they spun the drill with sinew. Down south, other tribes knew it too. But for most, the previously mentioned hand drill was enough. And once again, it's faster to grab flint and steel if you had it. But if a man is lost without his kit, he'd remember the stories. Maybe he'd seen a native work the bow once, or read some old trapper's account. So he'd carve the pieces, a curved stick for the bow, and a cord to string it, a straight and dry spindle, a fireboard, notched just so, and something to press down on top like a stone, a chunk of antler, or anything to keep the spindle steady while it burned its way through. Then the work. Back and forth, slow at first, finding the rhythm. The bow's pull, doing what your hands couldn't. And this time, blisters are spared, but your shoulders will ache and your arms will burn. But you had to keep at it until the dust piles, then blackens, Then there, a spark placed in the tinder. Frontiersmen knew it, the natives knew it, and if a mountain man had paged through some old survival manual or just listened around the fire long enough, he'd know it too. The bow drill worked. Fast. Some say a practiced hand could pull an ember in 5 seconds. But out on the trail, with the right wood and a steady pace, a minute's work might be all it took. And once again, the bow drill was for when luck ran thin, when powder was soaked, when flint was lost, when the cold snuck up on you like death itself. Still, a man prepared was a man alive, and the pieces were easy enough to scrounge. Also, you won't find many journals bragging about it. Why write down what every woodsman knew? But the proof's there, in the old stories, in the artifacts left behind. The bow drill was part of the trade, a last resort maybe. But when the night got long and the fire wouldn't come, it was enough. And if you did manage to find flint and steel, then you'll save yourself a whole lot of effort. Number 3. Flint and steel striker. When matches were nowhere to be found, a mountain man turned to the next oldest trick in the book: flint and steel. Now, this wasn't some fancy invention, mind you. It was basic, simple, and passed down through centuries, used by Romans, Vikings, men who lived by the edge of a blade. And when Europeans crossed the Atlantic, they brought it with them. Men like Boone, Bridger, Lewis, and Clark. They all carried it. Because when the wind came down hard on you and the cold bit deep, this was the one thing that wouldn't fail them. Speaking of those old frontier legends, don't forget to watch their full episodes on our channel. We have hours-long series that will hook you from start to finish. But for now, let's show you how flint and steel worked. First, you strike a piece of high-carbon steel against flint, which is a sharp, hard stone. A spark flies every time you strike. It's not much, just a tiny glowing fleck of metal, burning white-hot for a second in the dark. But if it lands on the right tinder, like charred cloth maybe, or punk wood turned soft with rot, then it'll catch. You see just a hint of smoke at first, then a glow. Feed it gently and blow. And there it is, fire. The smart ones carried their kit in a pouch which contained flint, steel striker, a little charred tinder, and maybe some dry grass or bark. Meriwether Lewis knew. Before heading west, he bought hundreds of flints and dozens of strikers. He knew his men would need them. He knew the land wouldn't forgive carelessness. But cloth was precious out there. So the old-timers learned to use what the earth gave them: rotten wood, cattail fluff, tinder fungus, anything that'd catch that spark and hold it just long enough. A mountain man didn't wait for cold fingers and failing light to test his gear. Now this was faster than rubbing sticks and surer than prayer. Even greenhorns could learn it quick. And the natives, they took to it fast once trade brought iron into their hands, leaving their old friction fires behind. Why waste sweat when steel could call fire from stone? But nothing's perfect. Rain could ruin it, a dull flint, a worn-out striker. And if that happened, then suddenly you're blowing on dead sparks while the cold sets in. Smart men kept their tinder dry, their kit close. And once they had fire, they nursed it. At night, they'd bury coals in ash, a quiet promise for morning. But if wood friction fails, then you can always borrow fire from the sun. Number 4, burning glass. Sunlight. That's all it took. No striking, no rubbing. All you needed was a clear sky and a steady hand. A convex lens, no bigger than a watch face, could pull the fire right down from the heavens. Hold it just so, let the light bleed into a single, burning point. Dry tinder, char cloth maybe, or a scrap of punk wood, would smolder quick, just like the flint and steel method we talked about earlier. Then you'll get a wisp of smoke, and then the glow of an ember. It wasn't new, however. Men had done this for centuries. Ancient Greece's Archimedes himself was said to have torched enemy ships with mirrors. But out in the American wilderness, under the endless spread of western sky, a mountain man with a burning glass had an edge. There was no wasting tinder on failed sparks, no worn-out hands from spinning a bow drill. All you needed was patience and the sun doing the work. And of course, it had its limits. Cloud cover, or the low slant of morning or evening light, and that lens was just a piece of glass. That's why flint and steel still rode in every pack. But when conditions were right, then damn, it's faster than striking a spark. Lewis and Clark knew its worth. They carried 100 of them, not just for fire, but for trade too. They handed one to a chief, then watched his eyes when the tinder caught. No words needed. A thing like that spoke plain. By the way, don't forget our short episode about the dangers the Lewis and Clark expedition faced. It's one heck of an episode you wouldn't want to miss. Anyhow, yeah, some mountain men carried burning glass, tucked in a pocket, maybe fitted into a compass. Traders stocked them too. Not every man trusted glass over steel, but when the sun hung high and the air was dry, then, yeah, it was fire, pulled straight from the sky. A plain scrap of paper, a chunk of dry fungus. If the sun was strong, that was all it took. They'd hold the glass steady and wait. The fire would come. It's like pulling flame from the sky. A burning glass was practical, in the right season. It didn't run out, didn't wear down. No gears, no powder. A man resting at noon might light his pipe with it. He could save the flint for storm days. Some used their spectacles instead. Simple, yet still effective. But of course it had limits. No sun, no fire. It was useless at night, worthless in the rain. And in deep winter, with the sun dragging low, it often failed. Even more, the lens could crack on rough travel. Drop it once, and that was that. Nobody relied on it, to be honest, not for life. But when it worked well. It was a piece of the old world used in a new one. Science and survival tied together. And next up, air, force, and a simple piston to spark fire. Number 5. Fire piston. They called it a fire piston. Some said fire syringe. It wasn't common. Wasn't from here. But a few of these odd things made it west. Maybe it was brought over by traders. Maybe passed from hand to hand like some strange magic. It didn't look like much, just a cylinder and a plunger. Wood, metal, horn. But when you slammed that plunger down hard and fast, the air inside got squeezed so tight and hot that the tinder at the end would catch heat from air. Inside the plunger's tip, you'd pack a bit of tinder like char cloth, fungus, or even some fine dry fiber. Then you push it down fast, real fast, and if you did it right, you'd see it, just a hint of red, a coal. Then you pull the plunger back, and there it was. Life, held on the end of a stick. The trick worked because of pressure, the same kind of pressure that would later run diesel engines. But the fire piston came first. It had been used in Southeast Asia for a long time before Europe ever caught wind of it. It was made from bamboo, passed through generations. By the early 1800s, Europeans started building their own. A few made their way to America, maybe to a fort, maybe to a rendezvous, maybe to a trapper with coin to spare or curiosity to burn. But it never spread far. After all, out here, men trusted flint and steel. It was cheap, reliable, and easy to fix. The fire piston, however, was different. It was delicate, rare. But for the few who had one, the mountain men who knew how to use it must have felt like sorcery. Fire from air. Just imagine, a trader or trapper at a rendezvous, surrounded by fellow trappers and tribesmen. He pulls out a strange tube, presses down hard, and just like that, fire. No spark, no flint. With just a pop of heat and ember, people would have stared, maybe leaned in closer. Things like that caught eyes. So yeah, tricks like these weren't unheard of. Lewis and Clark carried phosphorus to make fire appear from water, just to impress. Same idea, different tools. But if a mountain man carried a fire piston, was it worth the trouble? In some ways, yes. It made an ember fast, faster than flint and steel. And in wet weather, as long as the tinder stayed dry, it worked. Didn't need a spark, didn't need flame. Pressure was all that was needed, but it came with its faults. It had to be built just right. If the seal loosened or wore down, it failed. It needed grease or water at the plunger to keep airtight. That could freeze in winter or dry up in heat. And like any tool, it could break or be lost. But you know, that window was short. Friction matches came along in the 1820s. Lucifers, they called them. These were easier and cheaper, worked right out of the box. The fire piston died out. It never became common, but for a brief time, it stood at the edge of old ways and new ideas. And when gadgets fail, you can always point the lock and call sparks. Number 6. Flintlock firearms as igniters. A mountain man with a flintlock rifle could also start a fire. When matches weren't around or never existed in the first place, the lock of a flint gun could be all you had. These old guns worked by slamming a piece of flint against steel. That strike lit powder and fired the shot. But it also threw sparks, and sparks meant fire. If a man had powder but no char cloth, or if his fire steel had gone dull, he still had the lock. First, he'd empty the pan, pack in a scrap of tinder, maybe a sliver of cloth, blackened and dry. Then he'd cock the hammer, pull the trigger, and let the flint crash down. Sparks flew, and if he was lucky, one caught. Then the cloth would glow. Then he'd lift it out slow, careful not to kill the ember. He'd then tuck it into a bundle of dry stuff like grass, bark, or lint, and breathe it to life. The whole gun became a fire tool, just a big, violent flint and steel. There was another way, too. Some men loaded a pinch of powder into the barrel without a ball, just the powder, and then packed some dry fluff at the muzzle, a scrap of moss maybe, or maybe a feather. Then they'd fire it. The blast might light the tinder right there in front of the gun. Quick fire, but risky though. It was loud and wasteful. Desperate move, really. Most stuck with the lock, however. Safer, quieter. They got good at it. Some used it just to light a pipe, bit of tinder in the pan, pop the hammer, and touch the glowing ember to the bowl. That lock, the snapping jaws, the sharp edge of flint, was so tied to fire making that folks made tools out of it. In the 1800s, some homes had what they called tinder lighters. It was simply a flintlock lock fixed to a small box. You'd pull the trigger, it sparked into the tinder, and there you had it, a flame, like an old-world lighter. Same idea, just louder. For mountain men, carrying a gun meant you already had what you needed to make fire. No need for a separate striker or fancy tools. All you needed was some dry tinder. This method worked in rough weather too. Wind, snow, cold, it didn't matter much. The lock sparked hard and clean, better than striking by hand. More force, more control, but it came with one warning: make sure the gun's empty. No load in the barrel, no powder in the chamber, just the pan and the lock. Some went so far as to take the lock off the rifle completely, just to be safe. Others carried a spare. Once the tinder caught a spark, it was back to basics, nested in dry fluff, and blow slow until it burned. So, yeah, a gun cracked skulls if you were cornered, and it started fires when the night got cold. Later on, when flintlocks gave way to percussion caps, the method slipped away. But for a time, if you had a flintlock, you had fire. Even native tribes who got these guns from traders likely used them the same way. And speaking of percussion caps, when rifle sparks run dry, your powder and cap step in. Number 7. Gunpowder and percussion cap. Emergencies? By the mid-1800s, percussion cap rifles and revolvers rode into every frontier camp. When rain soaked your tinder and flint and steel lay buried in your kit, you needed another spark. This was a last-ditch move, a trick born of desperation. A famous account of this method comes from the legendary cattleman and former Texas Ranger Charles Goodnight, who described how a scout could start a fire with nothing but powder, a bit of cloth, and a percussion cap. Goodnight's story, recorded by historian J. Evetts Haley, gives a step-by-step of this frontier hack. As a last resort, the scout dampened a calico rag and worked it in a quantity of gunpowder held in his palm until the cloth was saturated with the half-melted powder. He then placed a percussion cap on one of the prongs of his metal spur, wrapped the powder-soaked rag around it, and busted a cap on the rag by hitting the cap with the back of his Bowie knife. The cap would pop. Tiny flames and burning grains of powder burrowed into the rag, and in a heartbeat, that rag flared to life. You'd lift it carefully and set it under a bundle of dry grass or twigs. And then finally, you'd coax that spark into a proper blaze. But why lean on this risky hack? Well, on a soaked prairie night, matches were useless and wood was damp. But powder, once clumped tight, could still burn hot. And percussion caps gave you a small explosion on demand. You paid for it in valuable shot and caps. You risked a flying ember or a smart sting from the blast. But when cold, wet, and low on options, fire at any cost was worth it. This trick, however, never made it into any how-to book. But around campfires, men shared it in whispers. One cowboy would spill a pinch of powder onto damp kindling. Then he'd spark it with flint or a percussion cap, using the powder to wake flame in wet wood. So yeah, survival turned firearm gear into fire tools. You didn't try this for every campfire, but when you knew what you were doing, it worked. A percussion cap spits a jet of flame. Black powder flashes in a heartbeat. Wrapped in cloth, it smolders, even when wet. That spark cut through the moisture, but it cost you bullets and caps. And out on the plains, ammo was as good as gold. You only used it when you had no choice. By the 1850s, matches were rolling off wagons. Still, rain could kill them. So imagine a ranger in a thunderstorm, everything soaked. He'd bite down on the memory of an old scout's tip, heel of his spur as anvil, a scrap of shirt dusted with powder. One strike, cap pops, rag glows, and he's got his fire back. Truly, these moments show how resourceful they were. They bent military tools to bushcraft needs. From rubbing sticks to chemical sparks, they tried it all. And in the end, fire was survival, forged from desperation. Every spark burned a story of risk and resolve.